Hi everyone, this is Fabien Castin, and in today's video I will be reviewing the RICOH THETA SC to find out if this little 360 camera is a good choice to capture HDR probes that can later be used to light your 3D scenes. Ever since RICOH announced the first THETA camera in 2013, I have been interested in acquiring one to capture HDR probes, but the price of 300–400 euros has always been a bit high to my taste for such limited use. I have actually no interest in 360 videos, for instance. But recently I found that one could buy a brand new THETA SC in Sweden for only 100 euros instead of 250. So it was time for me to give it a try. I decided to head to Stockholm's beautiful countryside to experiment with it and compare it with a full-frame DSLR rig. On paper, the RICOH THETA SC is supposed to be a cheaper, almost voluntarily crippled version of the THETA S. The hardware is the same, but the software is a bit different. But RICOH released a new firmware that adds multi-bracketing option in the phone app, which makes it super easy to capture HDRI. Okay, so let's have a look at the RICOH THETA specs and the settings that I'm using for the HDRI. The shutter speed, you can go up to 8,000 frames a second, which is pretty good. And you can go to 60 seconds on the longer side. So it's very broad range, really good. The problem with that camera is the fixed aperture. It's f2, which is pretty bright. That's what you would find on most phones. It's really good for low light situations and interior photographs, but if you want to capture an HDRI, you're gonna have issues with that. The ISO, it's 100. I'm always gonna use 100. I think you can go up to 1600, but I would never do that with such a small sensor. Probably maybe use ISO 200 if I shoot at night to just make the capture a bit faster, but never more than that. So in total, the maximum EV that you can capture is 15, and that's pretty low, I would say. It's gonna be a problem for highlights, but then we're gonna see that later. The white balance is good because in the app you can set the white balance using Kelvin value. You don't have to rely on presets. So I'm always using 6500 because I always want to capture all my HDR images with the same white balance, and I do the white balancing in the camera itself. If you do lookdev, I would understand that you would actually white balance before, but that's not what I want to do here. The exposure bracketing is supported by the app. You just need to make sure that you're using the latest firmware. It's pretty easy to use, and you can take up to 13 pictures. I'm using 1.3 EV increment. That works for most situations. And also what I do is that I always make the top one, like the first picture, is gonna be my fastest shutter speed, so 8,000ths of a second. And then when I know that that's going to be overexposed, and when I know that I don't need the longest exposure at the bottom, then I can just stop the process, and it will still store the previous images that were taken. So I actually just have one setting for my multi-bracketing that I use, and that works 90% of the time. If I want to capture at night, I just change the 8,000ths into a 30-second exposure. So I just have to change one value in the bracketing, and I'm done. And the capture time from taking the Theta out, turning it on, connecting the Wi-Fi, and taking the pictures, it's taking me 45 seconds, so that's pretty quick. And now if we compare with the full frame rig, fastest shutter speed is 4,000ths of a second up to 30 seconds, so no problem here. The big difference is that I'm using a fisheye, and then it has an aperture ring that I can control, so I can go up to f22 in that case during daylight, or I can go to f3.5 at the lowest for night if I want. And in the daylight I'm using an ND32 filter, which makes the image 5 tops darker. And the exposure bracketing, there are several ways to do it. You can actually buy an external control, but that's actually quite expensive. I'm thinking of the ProMod control, for instance. Otherwise, you can use specific firmware from Magic Lantern. It's free, but it's a bit like you might be voiding your warranty, because if you break your camera while installing or updating the firmware, then it's not going to be covered by Canon. So, you know. And then it can only capture 9 pictures, but since I'm shooting in RAW, then I can change the increments to 1.5 EV. I think usually that's pretty good. And sometimes if I need to take more than 9 pictures, then I actually just take the same position of the camera several times, like several brackets. Capture time in general is 7 minutes from taking the camera out and putting it on a tripod and doing all the positions. I'm using a fisheye in that case. I'm doing 6 positions. If you're using a rectilinear lens, like a 14mm, you probably have to do 14 positions, so that can take much more time. And if we look at the HDRI creation process, so you get JPEGs out of the Theta SC. I'm just using Photoshop CC to merge them to HDR. I think I've tried them all. I've tried HDR merge, Picture Note, Luminance HDR, Photomatics, Affinity Photo, PTGui, and Photoshop CC. And for JPEGs, it looks like Photoshop is the one that gives the best results. Like, they seem to be the most correct. Also, the license of CC it's a subscription system, so I mean, I don't really like it, but it's still very affordable. Exposure compensation using Blender and the Photographer Addon. What I do is that I take one of my images in my bracketing and I'm checking those settings. I'm putting them into Blender with my add-on Photographer, and then I'm just matching visually the exposure. So you have to do some exposure compensation in Photoshop on the HDR image to match the camera settings, because Photoshop doesn't use absolute values. They are just automatically finding an average value and just like pre-exposing the HDR. And I don't like to do that. I think it's good if you do lookdev, but if you actually doing lighting, it's good to have the proper relation between your local lights and your HDRI. All in all, that process time just takes 4 minutes per probe, so it's very quick. And for DSLR, I would definitely recommend to read the Unity presentation that they did a couple of years ago, done by my friend Sébastien Lagarde and his team. This is the best documentation that you can find. And also, they really analyzed how to get the best information out of the RAW files. And in that case, I'm following their instructions. So I'm converting my RAW files to TIFF 16-bit using DC RAW. And you have the commands information here, -4, -t, -v, which make sure that your colors and everything are properly extracted in a linear space with a linear curve. Then after that, you convert those 16-bit TIFFs to 32-bit TIFFs using Photoshop. And that's because PTGui needs to know that it should treat the information, like the input, as linear and not sRGB. So then you input those TIFF 32 bits in PTGui and you do the stitching and HDR merging. PTGui is definitely the best out there. It's giving great results for the HDRI merging as well. I think these are the most accurate. And all in all, it takes 50 minutes per probe, so it takes quite some time. So let's have a look at the results. This is what I get with a DSLR. I'm getting a file that is like 7000 by 3500. This image feels a bit greenish to me. The sun was kind of orange, and all the leaves as well, the dead leaves on the ground were more orange than that. But it's probably more scientifically correct because I followed like these instructions from Unity guys. And this is the theta results. So even if the file is not that much smaller, it's 5300, it's definitely not as sharp. Probably the lenses are a bit soft, and so even if the resolution would be higher, it would actually not resolve more details. I think the colors are a bit more accurate to what I was seeing in real life, but you can notice like a very red area here, and that's the front lens. Like the front lens is facing the sun that is here, so you're getting some very strong glare that can affect the whole colors and the whole brightness of this area. But the biggest problem is this. This is the darkest exposure I could get, and that's how much information I'm losing when capturing the HDR with the RICOH THETA. Compared to the DSLR rig that can capture up to 26 EV, so I'm actually getting like a small dot out of the sun. So how does it affect the renders? As you can see, it's grainy, the noise is terrible, there is something wrong with that. I didn't know, but apparently cycles and EXRs don't really work well together. I don't know if it's the multiple importance sampling that doesn't work, but I'm used to use EXR, OpenEXR formats for anything with 32 bits. It's kind of like the norm, I would say, but it doesn't work well with cycles. If you save it to HDR format, then it looks great. I have the sun, I have the sharp shadows, everything is just working as expected. and it looks pretty good. So this is going to be all reference. Now if I compare to what I get from the RICOH THETA, it's terrible. That's what we saw from the clamping. We don't have a sunlight, we are getting soft shadows, it's like it's completely overcast. And that's a problem for shooting with an f2 aperture. There is something else though. This is the reference. So this is the sun from the HDR, and what I usually do is that I paint out the sun out of my HDR. And there are two reasons. One is that if I work in game engines, then I want to use a sunlight because I want to light my dynamic objects with them. If I would keep my sun in the HDR and use that as a sky, then I would have twice the information of the sunlight, so it's not good. So I usually paint it out, and this is what I did in that case. You can see the difference is very subtle because I managed to find the same position and the same intensity. This is the second reason why I use a sunlight instead of keeping it in the HDR. In the HDR I get a bit more grain than if I use a sunlight. The sampling is a bit better. Also, if you look at the render time here, this is with the HDR, I mean, it's taking 41 seconds. With the sunlight it's 36 seconds and better sampling. So for this kind of scenes the difference is not really obvious, but for other scenes like maybe interiors, where you have the sunlight shining through a window, it's probably going to be a big difference in that case. So I always remove the sun from my HDR, and then if we just look at the theta with that sunlight, this is what I get. So if we compare between the reference, or in that case it's reference but with the sunlight, and this one, it's not that bad. Like, the difference is not that bad. The biggest difference that you can notice is the colors, of course. This is more red, and also maybe this area. So let's have a look at it in details. Here I can see that my sun has a nice like circle in a way, and also the clouds are lit from the sun. Here everything is just flat white, it's not interesting, but also I'm getting a very small sun, and here you can see that it's just a few pixels, and that kind of things might actually flicker in animations. But in that case, that's with a material that is roughness 0. And if I use a roughness that is not 0 but almost 0, then I'm getting a better highlight from that sun, and I'm getting more realistic like reflections here. So I would always recommend to never use like a roughness 0. I think no real materials anyway have a roughness 0, maybe mirrors, but that's it. Everything has a bit of scratch, even the crumbles. That's my pro tip for you. You can also always say that maybe you can just change the sun size, and you have the option. You can change the circle size of the sun. But then when you do that, then you actually soften the shadows, and you can already see like this is my HDR and this is my sun, and in that case my sun circle is already bigger than what it should be because my shadows are a bit softer. But let's go back to the HDR, and now what I've done is that I white balance it in Blender using my Photographer Addon. So I just like picked that color, and then what if we compare it with the theta that has been color balanced? It's in the end it's pretty close. You still have a difference of colors because it has a different camera response curve, but it's pretty close other than that. Of course this is never as great in that case as this one, but I mean maybe you could live with it in some cases, I don't know. So quick question, like how do we find your sun rotation without the intensity? Because for me it was easy. I had a DSLR rig, I have my reference, I know exactly my rotation for the sun and everything. Well, usually what you do is you have a gray ball in your shots, because with a gray ball then you can find the direction of the sun and you can just tweak the intensity. The chrome ball is there to help you finding the right rotation of your HDRI, because since you see the reflection here, then you can just align it easily with your reference image. But the gray ball I think is definitely enough in general to find the sun direction and the sun intensity. Here's another example. What I've done is that I was actually hiding behind those trees, so it was in the shadows, some sort of shadows, and also it was the sunset, so the intensity of the sky is a bit lower than before. And if we compare to the RICOH THETA, same thing here, it's much more red, but it also looks more correct. I think this is a bit too green and blue, and here the sun is right behind the trees. I get a bit of fringing here. So how does it look after I've white balanced them? This is the reference from the DSLR rig, and this is the one from the Theta. And here, it's pretty good. I mean, I would definitely use the HDR from the Theta. Of course, you can see that it has less details behind, like this is more sharp, but in the reflections, you will never really notice that you are missing some sharpness. So it's definitely good enough for lighting a scene, I think. And here is another test at night. Capture it in a minute or so, because the longest exposure was 30 seconds. I can see some posterization in the colors here. I don't know, probably like Photoshop not really doing a great job at merging the HDR. Also, it has some kind of weird flares. But overall, from this camera, I think the output is really good. And when you use it to light your scene, here it's been color balanced as well. I think it's pretty good. Like, you get a lot of highlights, everything looks really nice and realistic. So of course, because there are a lot of small lights, I need to crank up the samples to 1000, and the render times just has to be pretty high. But you see all the shadows that you get? I mean, you capture the entire range of the lights and it looks really good. So I would definitely recommend the RICOH THETA for night shots. So let's do a summary of what I like and what I dislike about the camera. So one thing is that you can carry it and place it everywhere. I would definitely take more HDRI thanks to that. It's easy and fast to capture, as you could see in the numbers. The price was unbeatable. I mean, in that case, I got it for 100 euros. Normally it should cost 250. I don't think I would have bought it for 250. 100 euros, I have no regrets. The multi-bracketing from the app, it's great. So don't forget, if you buy that camera, to update the firmware. Stuff that I'm not really fond of, the resolution. I mean, it could always be higher, but I don't think it's a blocker. I think it's enough if you capture HDRIs. No horizon level. You have to think about that. If you buy a tripod, take one that has a head with little like bubbles for the level. The pouch that comes with it is just like a padded fabric pouch. It's not going to protect it that much. If you let it fall, it might break. And for the things that I don't like about it, the HDRI dynamic range, definitely not enough if you want to capture bright daylight. JPEG only, it's going to be a problem if you want to be to have more accuracy in your colors for your look dev. And also something I didn't think would be a problem, but the Wi-Fi is pretty short. Like, you cannot really go far from the camera, so it's pretty hard to hide in the pictures. Actually, you can see myself in a picture just like trying to hide behind trees. So would I recommend it? I would say no for look dev. When you do look dev, you want to be able to change the environment very quickly to just see if your object looks great in all of them. So you don't want to have to rely on the sunlight that you have to rotate and change the intensity on everything. You just want everything to be in that one image. So for that case, the RICOH THETA is definitely not good. I was also thinking to use it for photogrammetry delighting. The problem is the camera response curve. Since it's not going to be the same response curve as your camera that you're going to use to take pictures for the photogrammetry. And since you cannot recalibrate those, like you saw in my pictures, I have the color passport from X-Rite. Usually what you do is you analyze those patches with the software that comes with the color passport, and it creates a profile that you can apply on all your images just to calibrate and neutralize the camera response curve. But this only works with DNG files. It only works with RAW files. I think that might be a way to hack the JPEGs, just convert them to DNG and try that. But that sounds hacky and probably not accurate, so I would not recommend it for delighting. I think it's better if you actually use the same camera for capturing the HDR that's going to be used for delighting as the one that you use for the photogrammetry pictures. That being said, I think it's totally okay to make art. I think that people just always think that the most beautiful images are only done with like the most accurate, scientifically correct captured HDR, and I totally disagree with that. In games, we are always merging, painting skies together. It's always like a lot of actual artistic process that goes into lighting a scene. If you only use HDRI to light your scenes, you're probably just like a prop artist or a character artist and you want to show your images. But if you want to tell stories, or if you want to create specific ambiances, atmospheres, like in architectural design, I definitely think that we fake a lot, and the same way photographers fake a lot when they actually capture different exposures and merge like dark skies with bright landscapes. In cinema, we put filters everywhere on the lenses, on the windows. We fake a lot of things. So if you know what you're doing, I would say you can definitely use the RICOH THETA HDRIs as a base, and then you can just play around with it, and you can make probably good art with that. Of course, keep in mind to avoid the bright daylight, because that's not where it's going to shine. So is there any way to improve its shortcomings? As you can see, some people have tried to make some filters, ND filters socks. I've seen the results, they were not great. I don't know if that's because of the filter itself that's not flat in front of the lens, or if it was just these pictures were not good. Someone made a lens cap. You can also plug in a filter in there, an ND filter, and he actually gave the 3D models that you can print yourself. So maybe I'm gonna give it a try. I don't know. The problem is that I see that it might cover the edges of the lens, so it might mess up with the stitching. He says that it doesn't, but I don't know. I would have to try it. Any other alternatives? Yeah, well, the RICOH THETA V, the most recent version. The biggest change with that camera is actually it shoots 4K videos, but it's probably the same lens and probably the same sensor, because it's the same resolution. It's 15 megapixels. The good thing about it is that the fastest shutter speed is now 25,000 of a second, and they also changed the lowest ISO. I hope that it's a native ISO, but now it can go to 64, which means that it's 2.5 stops more than the RICOH THETA SC. It's definitely not enough to capture the sun, but it's probably going to help with clouds, so that's already an improvement. The bad thing is that it costs 400 euros, and I think it's way too much if you're not interested in doing any video, and also it's still JPEG only. And another one would be the Xiaomi Mijia Mi Sphere. The good thing with that one is that it actually has RAW format, and it also has more resolutions, 25 megapixel. The price is actually really good compared to competition. It's just 280. So if you compare to the RICOH THETA SC, that is 250 normally, I would definitely buy the Xiaomi. I think it's much better on a lot of aspects for that price. One issue is that the fastest shutter speed is 6,400 of a second, so it's a bit lower than the RICOH THETA SC. But since it's shooting in RAW format, maybe it's just like a third of a stop difference. So maybe the RAW format can store more information, highlights, and compensate for that. And also the problem is that if you're shooting in RAW, you need stitching because it only outputs 2 images, one for each sensor. And that's it for this review. It was much longer than I expected, so I hope that it was interesting for you and it helped you make up your mind if you wanted to buy a 360 camera for HDRI capture. You can also make up your own opinion by downloading the HDR images that I created with the Theta SC for this tutorial. The links are in the description of the video, and feel free to leave any feedback or questions in the comments below. Until next time, goodbye.